without, oh, thank you. So I am going to post a link in the chat to our speaker's website. So without further delay, I am going to present to you. I'm very honored to introduce Dr. Catherine Quinlan to you. So Dr. Quinlan is an associate professor of science education at Howard University in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction. She works with both undergrad and graduate students in science education methods and education foundations. She is also an author and a researcher, most recent in the area of contributing to the research literature on different research methodologies for Black representation in the STEM curricula. And I also will be sharing another link in the chat for Dr. Quinlan's newest book, which comes out in just a few weeks. Her book, Black Representation in the Science Curriculum, Implications for Identity, Culture, Belonging, and Curriculum Development. And I will drop that in the chat, and it should be coming up now. And I will turn things over to Dr. Quinlan, who will talk to us today about what we learn from the lived experience of Black scientists. And in the chat, we have a link to a Padlet. So if you have any questions that come up during Dr. Quinlan's presentation, you can add them to the Padlet. And then at the end of her talk, we will go ahead and address the questions. So Dr. Quinlan.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vitello. It's an honor to be here and to see everyone. I am going to share my screen, but I do want to do a little disclaimer here, because I guess after doing all of this research, I find myself doing more talks where we're thinking about thinking, or really more reflective on conditions more than giving a lot of content. Okay, but I did mix it in there with some content. So I think in some ways I'll be asking you the questions. Let me just. So today I'm going to talk today about what we can learn about from the lived experiences. Let me just reduce this out of the way. Sorry. Okay. So my talk today is what can we learn about from the lived experience of Black scientists. And I want to begin today, and I do have to give credit to one of my favorite authors who also used this quote. And I thought it was so fitting for what I'm doing today. If you think in terms of a year, plant a seed. If in terms of 10 years, plant trees. If in terms of 100, teach the people. And I love this quote and stumbled upon it recently, mostly because of when I first conceived of my work between around 2006, 2007. I mean, sometimes I go back and say, oh, maybe it's 2001. I knew that it was for the long haul. And I told myself that no matter when I published my work, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, that it would still be needed and it would still be relevant. And so I use the word conceived because so many roads in my life serve to plant seeds in me. And so sometimes I get confused about when did I really start this? And so when we think about diversity, equity, and we think about inclusion, what would you say has planted a seed in you and led you to be interested in inclusion, equity, and belonging? If you can just put the responses in the chat. I want this to be interactive. I want this to be a conversation, because you'll see some connections even with some of the narratives that scientists that I'm going to share. I'm just going to take a peek and see if anyone posted what might have planted a seed in you and led you to be interested in equity and belonging. observing successes, my own experiences, plus work to make undergrad. Okay. Realizing I was treating students differently based on, okay, awesome. Okay. So for me, I love these responses. And what a seed was planted when I first read books about a history of science. And even another book on the science education of American girls. And I wondered where I fitted in. You know, I mean, this is amazing history, this is rich history, but nothing was there about African Americans at the time. So I set about working to understand the history and trying to figure out, well, in the long run, I want our students to see people like us in the curriculum. And so as I worked on looking at history, um, I focused on developing the skills I would need to help me get to a certain place, to redefine, reimagine, and perhaps in some way understand what it would take for us to, and I'm going to use this because I'm learning more and more, really deprogram our thinking. And so I did so diligently, patiently, really taking a lot of turns and directions that someone in my position in science education academia would not take. And so when we think about this led me to my book, which is the culmination of, I would say, over 20 years of work, and which will come out in August. And so I want you to think about, even as you think of inclusion and equity and belonging, what are your long-term goals with the work you do? You know, when you think about the seed that has been planted in you, are you thinking beyond a year? Are you thinking beyond 10 years? Are you thinking beyond 100 years? And this is a really important question because I really do believe that our orientation, when we think about planting a seed or many seeds, really do determine our approaches and the type of approaches that we take. And so when I think about this talk, what we will, what we learn from lived experience of Black scientists, I approach this in terms of 100 years. What can I do that will impact 100 years from now? And so keep that question in mind. I probably will ask it again. You know, where are you going with this in terms of your thinking? The beauty of being a part of BioGraphI is I can see that BioGraphI has taught beyond uh, the 1 year, looking at a 10 year, and by looking at curricula. Okay. But if we were to take this beyond, which is what my book is about, what can we capture as far as symbolism? And so in my work, I learned that there is a collective experience that's common to Black scientists that, and I want to begin by giving you just a small case, and then I'm going to expand by showing you why I use this particular case that's been on my mind and that I continue to research myself. And so one of the cases I want to look at is physicist Anthony Johnson. And I know I'm starting with physicists instead of biologists, even though I do look at biologists. A lot of it is I like to not repeat my talks. And so I'm showing you where I'm taking this to the next level of looking at belonging in my talks. And so I've looked at patterns. I've spent years collecting narratives, looking at patterns. I think give me a thumbs up if you've heard of the history makers. Okay, awesome. And so more than one scientist, when you look at their talks, they noted that affirmative action provided an opportunity, kind of like a foot in the door, so to speak. But when their experiences when they got there was another story. And we can talk about these experiences in so many different ways. But I think how it's important for you as a scientist to come to your conclusion, which is why I like to do this approach by showing you this is what the narrative is and what conclusion do you come to, because it doesn't matter what I say in the end. We all form our own conceptions based on our prior background, based on, our own experiences. But a sample talk, as I go through a sample talk, I'm going to read a narrative that came from this digital archive. And as you hear the narrative, which is what Anthony Johnson said, give your reaction in a chat. What observations do you make? What inferences? What are connections? What do you observe, and what resonates with you? Okay. So prior to this, he was talking about, before I put the chat on, he was talking about describing his experiences at Bell Laboratories, and he had a positive experience overall, and he describes with fondness that he was given a blank lab to research whatever he wanted, and so this is where that description takes off. Move these out of the way so you can see. So he said, "I'm going to say that things did not necessarily start off that way, where everything was great, that is. It took a little time in that, I was in a program that was basically an affirmative action program, minority program. And there were some that were, I wouldn't say hostile, but you could see they weren't necessarily interested in dealing with me in the early stages. And so I think what happened is that because I was at Bell Labs, I spent my graduate school there. I knew how to interact with people. I had learned. And so I guess I'd gotten somewhat of a thick skin. And I made it my business to go talk to people and tell them what I could bring to the table. And so I sat down with a number of folks at Homedale, which is in New Jersey. I said, now, this is the kind of lasers I can build. This is my experience. This is where the collaboration started to happen. And all those attitudes changed. The people that could barely look at me became my friends. Because, I belonged there. I think I'd proven that. I'd gone through the trials and tribulations necessary to be a part of this club, and that was important to me. And I thought that's what the program was about, is to level the playing field. And I felt that I was one of those examples of that. And I don't have any problem with these affirmative action programs as long as you level the playing field. We're not about lowering standards, and anyone that raises that is, they're just not telling the truth about the program. So I'm curious, did anything here resonate with you? Um, what's your reaction, hearing him say that? Maybe one or two, and then we'll move on. Mm. Negotiations are person to person, having to prove that you belong in the club. I made it my business. Wow. The onus was on him to get himself. Someone else said, it's so unfair that he had to do the work to belong. Okay. And so I wanted to reflect on his experience because he goes on to talk about, Bell Labs giving the opportunity, which he's grateful for. However, this example, along with my own example, I should say, led me to a conclusion that I want to talk about today. And I feel like it's the bottom line for many of the disparities and lack of equity that we observe. I strongly believe that many good things are being done. And some of these good things include, yes, a call for diversity. And someone else says here, I hate having to prove your worth, but science culture is still that in so many ways. Absolutely. But I want to give you some more questions to think about before I go on to talk about what more needs to be done. Can you put your hand on some of the specific good things that are being done right now? And what more needs to be done? And how do we get there? Someone says sustained conversations, work to diversify the faculty and student body. Thank you. Here's one more reflective question before we move on. Working in classes, inclusive. What does belonging mean to you? And how do you know that you belong? I ask you these questions specifically because how you think about these narratives really do depend on what belonging means to you and what others' belonging, feelings of belonging mean to you. And these nuances, I found them very, very, very interesting. I've been doing some research looking at what belonging is and what belonging means to other people, which I brought up in my book. And it's very interesting to see what belonging means to different people. So, any ideas? What does belonging mean to you? How do you know that you belong? What is the bottom line for belonging? Is belonging simple or complex? Just one or two, and then we'll move on from there. Not having to prove that you're part of the club. Not feeling like I have to prove myself, not wondering whether or not I belong. Belonging to me implies that there is also exclusion, no matter what. I'm reading your responses here. I'd realize I'm reading responses, but I didn't preface it as reading responses earlier, so hopefully people know I'm reading responses. A welcoming and supportive environment for all, including moms and parents, showing care to each other, leading to being one's authentic self. So I'm going to share a quote from a science education researcher. He looked at 304 students majoring in science and 307 scientists who already had degrees. And so while the study looks at alignment and the nature of alignment, along with how African Americans, whether in college or out of college, had to reposition themselves. This quote stuck with me, especially preparing for this talk. And this part is in the abstract. African American scientists were far more likely to report a weak sense of belonging to their community, and were far more likely to report subtle encounters with racism. By contrast, African American science students were more likely to feel comfortable with the science community and less likely to report subtle racist encounters. And I thought this was really important because we're talking about treating a colleague versus how we treat or think about a student. And I'd like you to think about this question. How might you view a Black colleague or peer differently or similarly from how you view a Black student? Because this is where we see the transition. We're preparing students in STEM. And so as a Black person, many times we ask, okay, so to what end, right? What are you preparing me for? These narratives do abound, in the Black community, especially when we talk about interactions. You've gone through years of studying, you felt included in college, but then things change when we get into, we call it quote unquote, right? The real world, even though college is part of the real world. But think about how it is you might view a Black colleague or peer differently from how you view a Black student. And what might you find more threatening about working with a Black peer that you don't find threatening about the Black student? And if you've never worked with a Black peer or colleague, then consider someone else of color. I intentionally mentioned Black because I think sometimes in our mind, it's easier to find someone that we feel comfortable with or resonate with more. Okay. And so in the chat, someone said an instructor might feel an ethical obligation to attend to students, but not necessarily to colleagues. That's definitely true. Generally, people want a colleague to have something in common with them personally. And then someone mentioned being heard and listened to. Okay, maybe I think that's before. Absolutely. But one of the quotes I don't remember if it's this scientist or different scientists, but One scientist said I've always done my best to mentor and nurture talent, underrepresented talent, especially to show them that the possibilities are there for you to explore. I believe that this is a very important last frontier of knowledge that as African Americans, we should feel we also belong there. And not only that, all human beings should have the right to explore if that's what they are passionate about and succeed at it. And I really want to share this quote because I'm thinking of the word succeed. Someone in the chat said, my Black students are often now my Black colleagues, Black colleagues. I'm guessing you mean Black here, not Black. Mentoring is critical, absolutely. But one of the things I've realized too is our approach to mentoring is critical as well. Because, I've spoken to peers in the field and colleagues who, you know, worked with professors and talked about their experience as Black mentees compared with their peers was very different. When a student was in a graduate assistantship, they found that they were doing more task-based work versus their white graduate peers who were doing more skill-based. And then they found also that their names ended up um, not being on publications. And so they didn't have that much to show after all the work they did. And it makes sense for us because we tend to think of task-based tasks as for people who we don't think have the skills attached to research. I bring this up because it's really important that how we include and how we mentor and how we think about mentoring, um, that it should reflect students' preparation. That and we should also think about student who is going out into the world. Their lack of preparation reflects largely on our lack of preparation and our poor leadership when it comes to mentoring. But I wanted to share some more before I go on, just a couple statistics. I drew this from an article that I wrote. This was from introductory biology students. I collected this. This was the first part of the study where I created an instrument to look at self-efficacy indicators. Now, what happened was for this particular portion, I only look at introductory biology students, but I did do some with STEM. Unfortunately, that was almost 400 students, and I haven't gotten to look at that data yet. So some of this does reflect non-STEM majors as well. But I still thought the statistics was important to note because for students, they thought the emotional cost of being a scientist is too much compared with what I get out of it. If you look at the results on the orange, you had more students strongly agree that the emotional cost was too much compared to the financial cost, which we often tend to think of, well, it is the financial cost. But for many of our Black students, they think about the emotional cost. And grads, okay, thank you. That's it. Grad students even more. Oh, that's interesting. Think about emotional costs, which definitely makes sense. In terms of the response to students talk about mentoring, it is important to me that my mentor are teachers from a similar ethnic and racial background. We had in this 51 agreed, 51 strongly agreed, 51 agreed. And then to some, it didn't matter. And, and again, what I found with our students, the most important thing was not what did that mentoring mean? I did some interviews that I haven't really revealed or published. But at the end of the day, why is that important? Again, that is important in issues when students experience with mentoring. They're finding that mentoring to prepare them with skills is very different from someone, focusing on tasks. Okay, and so one last one. I know that I can do well when I see people like me able to do challenging things. I doubt my own ability to do well. I found this really, really interesting because students were more likely to strongly agree that they can do well when they see someone like them doing something challenge and overcoming it. However, someone else's lack of ability did not affect their self-efficacy. Just because someone else had difficulty didn't necessarily mean that they would. However, being able to see someone like them do something challenging really had an impact. But the bottom line of all of this, and this is why I do the work that I do, the bottom line, at the end of the day, how we think about things, how we approach things is the economic pipeline. Based on, and I literally talk about this in almost every one of my publication, because this is a topic and conversation that came up when I had interviews the Gullah Geechee Islands and met with people and talked to them. Unfortunately, you know, we've been taught very well to preserve the economic pipeline, and oftentimes that means not supporting the progression of Black talent in ways that will preserve where they can reap the benefits and the wealth in the future. And so how do we get rid of a lot of those thinking, you know, that is impacted by the economic pipeline? I define the economic pipeline as the various, based on the various findings and the purpose. Economic pipeline is defined as a system of our network for the production and distribution of goods, wealth, and services. It's a bypass or network that results in the careful management of production and distribution of wealth and services. And unfortunately, you know, we have one of the biggest things that I've learned over time is that we don't support the innovation, the innovative aspect of our Black students and some of our students of color. And not just Black students, I'm talking about our scientists. I'm a big fan of Gay Hendricks and his work and his book, The Genius Zone. I love the way he defined the genius moment is an opening, an invitation to bring forth your highest potential. And in his book, he talks about the genius zone and just what does that mean? And unfortunately, one of the biggest differences and distinctions I see is how do we help our students and our scientists, our peers, live in their genius zone? I'm going to pause for a moment and ask you, I was going to ask you, what do you think? And I was going to ask you an impossible question. What do you think that you are unaware of? And a question that nobody can answer. So I'm going to ask you, what do you think someone else or other people you observe are aware of? Are unaware of, rather, especially when it comes to helping our students and helping our peers of color be innovative. Gay Hendricks talks about how being in our genius moment allows us to do what we love to do. And while I know many of us, even as professors, no matter who we are, many of us also feel this way, right? We're asked to do tasks that take us away from our talent, and tasks that we often feel that anybody can do. But unfortunately, this is worse for Black people and for other people of color and for women as well. And so I see some responses to what other people are unaware of. Okay, someone says here that there is not one right way to do things in science. Absolutely. And also, as I read through this, which one resonates with you? Think about what resonates with you that you might not have thought of. A person who had the path smoothed for them could find it hard to imagine that there are rougher paths. Okay, many are unaware of the lack of representation, how it affects a person. It's just not something they think about. The bandwidth it takes to be a model, so many others look up to, absolutely. Home situations, computer availability, okay. Approaches to science, multiple voices, stress, survivorship bias. Ooh, I like that one. Absolutely. And so I look at the economic aspect of things. I like to do interdisciplinary work. I found it interesting looking at this. Um, if we look at, sorry, okay, went back. Distribution of US wealth. This is a 2021 national report on early stage entrepreneurship in the US, and it's based on a rate of new entrepreneurs by race and ethnicity and the rate for Black people. They saw that the rate for Black people increased during the pandemic, and then it drastically fell after the pandemic. And they noticed a drop in survival rate after the pandemic. And there's another statistic where Yahoo's finance research cited that 46% of Black business owners, they cited community support as a primary motivation, compared to 24% of white business owners and 35% of all minority business owners. They were talking here about their reasons for opening their business. 46% of Black business owners did it to support the community. And so a lot of them fail because Black-owned businesses were more likely to be located in their own neighborhood, according to Brookings. But I show you this to show you, the cumulative changes in average wealth. This one was by the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis here, both of these. Why did I show you these? Because it has to do with Black innovation in STEM. When I first entered academia in around, I think it was around 2016, 2017, that I started looking at innovative scientists and inventions, because, that's what everybody starts, so that everybody starts to look at. And so one of the patterns struck me. As I began to look at inventions, I saw a pattern. And so the patterns I saw moved me away from, just talking about inventive scientists. I saw that many of them were not patented in the US. They patented overseas. So of course, this led me wondering, like, what is happening? After the pandemic, I did check this site, one particular site. After the pandemic, as you noted, everybody started paying attention to their websites. And a lot of the data I looked at before the pandemic on websites were removed. And so I don't think, I know I still have that data somewhere. I don't remember how much of it I analyzed for my book, but I do have a chapter looking at patterns in scientists. But I'm still, I'm still very interested in the patenting portion because it's an economic portion. And for me, it's the biggest telltale sign of what's happening in inclusion. Because this is where our heart is. Our heart is where our wealth is. And couple observation I made when it comes to scientists, a group of scientists, and how they articulated belonging. I want to share another, I won't say it's, I guess in some ways it's a case. But like I said, I've been collecting these narratives for so long. And I don't know how many of you've heard of Elizabeth Bishop Davis Trussell. Give me a thumbs up if you've heard of her. Okay. So she actually was she probably wouldn't be known in the scientist field as much, but I've been collecting these for years, and I know she died, according to the data, she died in 2010. And this was actually her narrative, I collected this before. I don't even think they were publishing it online just yet. That's why sometimes I don't remember, like, how far does my work date, because I've been collecting narratives just so long. Um, and so I'm thinking this might have even been around 2004. But she identifies as a person of color, woman of color. She went to my alumni, my alma mater, that is, at Barnard College. And they published uh, in hard copy, Different Voices, the Experiences of Women of Color at Barnard. And so I've kept these for years, looking at this. And so she was from the class of 1941, graduated, 83 years ago. And of course, phenotypically, you can't tell her race by looking at her, but she did indicate she identified a person of color. And so her advice was, if I have any advice for this group of Barnard College students of color, it is to use the freedom here to explore without fear of diluting loyalties or values. Those which are truly yours will be strengthened by having been chosen as well as received. And one of the other alumni also talked about really trying to make sure we explore, trying to make sure recognition. One of the biggest patterns I've seen, and I haven't fully explored it, but I still wanted to bring it up today, is the importance of recognition and types of recognition. I'm going to end with this call to action, but I'm not quite ending yet because I wanted to share one other thing. Take your work a step further and include the research of people of color and of Black people in your course topics, even without interviewing them. Uncover the hidden figures in each of your topic. Because this will endure beyond 100 years compared to the 1 or the 10 years. And so I am going to skip over this for now, and I wanted to share a quote with a student impact, but I didn't realize, I truly apologize. I did not realize I went over that much of the time. And I'm going to ask what questions there are. And I want to apologize. I usually look at time and I just did not this time. I apologize. You guys could let me know. I can't believe I went that long.
No, that was
I'll
great,
let you
Karen.
first.
Thank you so much. Kristen, do you want to take us into the next activity, perhaps breakout rooms?
Sure. So we don't have any questions in the Padlet, but please feel free if you have questions, something comes to mind, or you have comments, please feel free to put them there because we will be sharing that link with you later. So what is about to happen is that we will be going into breakout rooms for maybe 10 minutes or so. And so what's going to happen is that we will be breaking down into small groups, and we will have some questions that we will discuss into in our breakout room. And we will Pat, do you want to share those questions? Pat's gonna paste them into the chat. So while she's pasting that in the chat, we're going to start off with a quick icebreaker. What's something on your bucket list? And some of the question prompts we have for you to talk about are: what are the benefits of incorporating scientist stories into a science classroom? What sources do you draw on in your teaching? Are you satisfied with them? Do you want more? And then what barriers do you anticipate to implementing an approach like this? And then we will kind of all come back here in about 10 minutes or so, and then conclude our networking event today. Any questions or anything before we break you out into groups? We will see you shortly.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to the big room.
That was quick.
It was quick. I hope everybody had a chance to speak. Would one representative from each room like to talk a bit about what they chatted about?
I can go for our room, representing Suhan and Meredith. So we just shared a little bit about how our experiences implementing this in different ways. Meredith has done it and sort of sounds like a narrative, kind of is telling the story and intentionally incorporating different voices and contributions of the development of her field. I use the Scientist Spotlight repository as opt-in assignments that almost all of my students do almost all of because they love them. And Suanna's had a similar reception for doing these kinds of things in the classroom. So overall, great experiences in our room.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Erica. Would another room like to share what they talked about?
Well, our room talked about how, oftentimes textbooks lack representation and lack discussing the stories of scientists that do the science and focus on specific scientists. And so Catherine was sharing that she actually worked with a textbook and we got cut out right at that time. So if she would share her experiences, I would appreciate that, or we would appreciate that.
Absolutely. And it's funny that came up and I realized, yeah, I didn't talk about that today, but I did work on one of the National Geographic Cengage textbooks where they use diverse explorers, and I even have a copy. I didn't even think about that. Explorers from different parts of the world, and you get to see the different interests. I shared a link to a webinar. It's free. It's on demand, where I talked about different phenomena from the textbook itself that could be used, and along with there's some, I shared some video clips and highlights of this was the high school biology text, and this is just the first one, really. There are more to come with that, but yeah, sorry, I didn't think of sharing it. And I'll share my YouTube channel because someone had mentioned also there's some video clips that I had worked on, including plants that are important to African American Gullah Geechee, as well as a little historical perspective. And where plants came from. Most people don't realize watermelon and cantaloupes and all that stuff, where it came from. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Catherine, for sharing your expertise with us today. All these resources that I know we're all eager to go check out, right? We're running up against time. So just take a moment to thank Catherine for her time. Thank you so much I loved the talk today, and I'm excited to ruminate it on even more after we close out. As we close out, just a reminder that if you elected to have some resources sent to you after the meeting, we'll send those to you in an email, and that'll include the link to the Padlet, which you're welcome to drop questions on and comments on even after the talk. We'll check that out. A recording of this YouTube, a link to all the things that Catherine shared with us will be provided. And then also we'll ask you if you're interested, we can invite you to join our biography main page so that you can come to even more events like this and learn even more from other experts in DEI. So thank you to all of you for coming, and thanks again to Catherine.
Thank you so much.